On her way to a life-changing job interview, a poor girl accidentally jumped into a stranger's car and ordered him around like a driver. She had no idea the man behind the wheel was the very CEO with the power to hire or fire her on the spot. Julie Burton's morning was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. The alarm clock, that unreliable old thing she'd meant to replace for weeks, had betrayed her again, its silence mocking her as she jolted awake to the harsh light streaming through her thin curtains. Heart pounding, she glanced at the time, already 20 minutes late to get ready for the most important job interview of her life at Burke Enterprises. Not today, she muttered to herself, a quiet resolve cutting through the panic. She could still make it if she moved like lightning. She dashed to the kitchen, her bare feet slapping against the cold linoleum, and fumbled with the coffee maker. In her haste, the mug slipped from her fingers, spilling hot liquid across the counter in a steaming mess that soaked her sleeve. No time to clean it up. She grabbed her resume from the table, stuffed it into her bag, and threw on the only decent blouse she owned, one that was slightly wrinkled but would have to do. Her mind raced. This job could change everything. Steady pay, benefits, a chance to prove she was more than just scraping by. She wouldn't let a bad start ruin it. Bursting out of her apartment building into the bustling city street, the cool air hit her like a slap. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried by, and there, right at the curb, sat a sleek, black, luxury sedan, idling with its door slightly ajar as if waiting just for her. Without a second thought, driven by sheer desperation, Julie yanked the door open and slid into the back seat, slamming it shut behind her. "Drive, please, I'm late! Burke Tower as fast as you can," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. She leaned back, catching her breath, unaware that this impulsive leap was about to collide her world with one far removed from her own. Warren Burke sat behind the wheel of his custom Bentley, the leather seat cradling him like an old friend, though lately, even that felt empty. He'd pulled over for a moment to check an email on his phone, another merger detail that could wait, but he never let things slide. The city buzzed around him, indifferent to his empire, and he felt that familiar weight pressing down, the kind that came from years of building walls around a life that looked perfect from the outside. Then, without warning, the back door flew open, and a whirlwind of a woman tumbled in, slamming it shut with a force that rattled the quiet interior. She didn't even glance up front, just barked out orders like he was some hired hand. "Step on it. Burke Tower, and don't take the long way. I know the shortcuts. If I'm late because of traffic, my whole day's shot." Her voice carried that no-nonsense edge, the kind honed from too many mornings fighting against the odds. But there was a spark in it, something alive that cut through his usual fog. Warren's jaw tightened. Who did she think she was? No one spoke to him like that. Not employees, not rivals, not even his board of directors. For a split second, anger flared, hot and sharp, the urge to snap back and put her in her place. But then curiosity crept in, cooling the heat. She hadn't looked at him, hadn't recognized the face that graced business magazines and billboards. In her world, he was just a driver, invisible except for the service he provided. It was almost refreshing. A quiet amusement stirred deep inside, the first real feeling he'd had all week beyond the numbness of endless meetings. He set the phone down slowly, his fingers lingering on the steering wheel, feeling the smooth grain under his palms. Without a word, he shifted into drive and pulled away from the curb, weaving through the morning rush with the ease of someone who owned half the skyline. In the rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of her, fidgeting with her bag, smoothing her blouse, her face set in determined lines that spoke of quiet battles he could only guess at. Who was this woman, storming into his space like she belonged there? For once, Warren didn't mind the detour. He accelerated toward Burke Tower, the engine's low hum, the only sound between them, wondering what kind of chaos she'd bring when she realized her mistake. The car glided to a stop in front of Burke Tower, its towering glass facade catching the morning sun like a beacon of untouchable success. Julie exhaled sharply, gathering her things with a quick nod to the driver she still hadn't really looked at. "Thanks. You're a lifesaver," she said under her breath, more to herself than anyone, before stepping out and hurrying toward the revolving doors. The lobby swallowed her up in its polished marble expanse, the air cool and scented with faint traces of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. She smoothed her blouse one last time, her heart still racing from the chaotic start, but a quiet determination steadied her. This was her shot at stability, at proving she could rise above the endless grind. Up on the executive floor, the waiting area felt like another world, sleek furniture, abstract art on the walls, and a receptionist who eyed her with polite indifference. Julie sat straight-backed, flipping through her mental notes on the company, reminding herself why she was here. Burke Enterprises wasn't just any firm. It was a powerhouse in tech and finance, run by a man whose name alone opened doors. Warren Burke. She'd seen his photos in articles, sharp features, that commanding presence, but nothing prepared her for the moment the conference room door swung open. There he was, striding in with the effortless authority of someone who owned the room, the building, the whole damn city. The same man who'd driven her here. Julie's stomach dropped like a stone in water, the realization hitting her in waves. The driver wasn't some anonymous rideshare guy. He was the CEO himself. Her face burned as fragments replayed, the orders she'd barked, the assumptions she'd made. How could she have been so blind? But beneath the embarrassment, a flicker of defiance sparked. She'd gotten here on her own grit, mistake or not. Warren settled at the head of the table, his dark suit impeccably tailored, the fabric whispering softly as he moved. He didn't acknowledge the mix-up right away, his expression unreadable, those steel-gray eyes scanning the room before landing on her. The other interviewers shifted papers, but he took the lead, his voice smooth and measured, probing her with questions that went beyond the resume. Not just about skills, but about how she'd handle chaos, improvise under pressure. Julie answered steadily, drawing on years of juggling dead-end jobs and unexpected setbacks, her words carrying the quiet strength of someone who'd learned to turn obstacles into stepping stones. Inside, Warren felt that pull again, stronger now. This woman who'd stormed into his car like a force of nature intrigued him. She wasn't polished like the usual candidates, but there was a sharpness to her, a quick wit that cut through the corporate fluff. Firing her would be easy, expected even, but where was the challenge in that? He leaned back, a subtle smile tugging at his lips, hidden from the others. Instead, he decided to test her, to see if that spark could hold up in his world. As the interview wrapped, he dismissed the panel with a nod, leaving just the two of them. The room grew quieter, the hum of the air conditioning the only backdrop. "You're not what I expected," he said finally, his tone carrying a hint of amusement mixed with appraisal. Julie met his gaze, refusing to shrink. She needed this job. Bills didn't pay themselves, and pride wouldn't keep the lights on. When he outlined the trial, unusual tasks, starting today to prove her fit, she hesitated only a moment. It felt like a game, one where the rules were his, but she sensed an opening, a way to turn the tables with her own resourcefulness. She agreed, her handshake firm, sealing her entry into his orbit. As she left the room, the elevator descending smoothly, Julie wondered what she'd just stepped into. Warren watched her go from his office window, the city sprawling below, feeling a rare stir of anticipation. This wasn't just hiring help. It was the start of something unpredictable, a quiet deal that bound them in ways neither fully grasped yet. Julie's first day at Burke Enterprises felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon of glass skyscrapers. The office hummed with the quiet efficiency of people who moved millions with a keystroke, but she kept her chin up, her steps purposeful, reminding herself that she'd earned this trial through sheer nerve. Warren's executive suite was a world apart, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a conquered kingdom, his desk a slab of polished walnut that probably cost more than her year's rent. He looked up from his screen as she entered, his expression cool and expectant, that same subtle amusement lurking in his eyes from the interview. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly under his weight, and fixed her with a gaze that seemed to weigh her every move. "Let's start simple," he said, his voice carrying that effortless command. "Make me a cup of coffee. Perfect. Black, no sugar, but it has to be just right. Impress me." It was a test wrapped in casual words, the kind that could unravel someone less steady, a reminder of who held the power here. Julie felt a flash of irritation bubble up. This wasn't about coffee. It was about seeing if she'd jump through hoops, play the eager assistant. But she swallowed it down, nodding once before turning toward the sleek kitchenette, tucked in the corner of the floor. The space gleamed with high-end gadgets, a fancy espresso machine that looked like it belonged in a spaceship, grinders humming with fresh beans from some exotic blend. She could have fiddled with it, tried to craft something artisanal to match his world of luxury. But as she stood there, the steam rising faintly from the hot water tap, a different idea sparked. Why play his game on his terms? She'd show him a taste of her reality, the kind that didn't come with silver spoons. She reached for a plain mug from the cabinet, the ceramic cool against her palm, and scooped in a spoonful of the instant coffee lurking in the back. Cheap, no-frills stuff, probably left for the night shift. Minutes later she returned, setting the mug on his desk with a soft clink. The steam curled up, carrying a straightforward, unpretentious aroma that filled the room like a quiet challenge. "Today's coffee tastes like reality," she said evenly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "You might want to give it a try." It wasn't defiance for its own sake. It was her way of saying she saw through the test, that perfection wasn't always about expense or show. Warren stared at the mug, then at her, his usual composure cracking just a fraction. A muscle in his jaw twitched, annoyance flickering across his features like a shadow. How dare she turn his simple request into a statement? But beneath it, something else stirred, a reluctant respect for her nerve, the way she didn't cower or overcompensate. He picked up the mug, the heat seeping through to his fingers, and took a sip. It was bitter, ordinary, nothing like the bespoke roasts he was used to, but it hit him with an unexpected honesty. For a moment he said nothing, the silence stretching between them like a held breath. Inside, Warren grappled with the unfamiliar feeling. She'd caught him off guard again, this woman from outside his polished bubble. It irked him, but it also intrigued him more than he'd admit. Julie stood there, her posture steady, waiting for the verdict that could end her trial before it truly began. Little did she know, this small act had already shifted something subtle in the air between them, planting the first seed of a partnership neither had seen coming. Warren's days were always a meticulously orchestrated symphony of meetings, calls, and decisions that shaped fortunes. His schedule a fortress of back-to-back slots, designed to maximize every waking minute. No gaps, no breathers, just relentless forward motion, the way he'd built his empire, brick by unyielding brick. But Julie, with her unassuming practicality, forged from years of piecing together survival in a world that didn't hand out silver platters, saw it differently. She watched him that afternoon, buried in his screen, the lines around his eyes deepening with each ping of an incoming email. It wasn't her place to interfere, not really, but something in her couldn't stand by and watch the machine grind on without a pause. Quietly, while he was on a conference call, his voice booming with that authoritative edge, she slipped into his digital calendar. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard in the adjoining office, the screen's glow reflecting her focused expression. She didn't overhaul everything, just subtle shifts, a 5-minute buffer slotted here after a tense negotiation, another there before diving into quarterly reports. She labeled them simply, breathing space. It was her little rebellion, drawn from her own hard-learned lessons, how a moment to step back could clear the fog, sharpen the mind, turn chaos into clarity. Back in her old jobs, Flipping burgers or manning registers, she'd stolen those breaths in alleyways or stockrooms, knowing they were the difference between burning out and pushing through. When Warren emerged from his call, rubbing his temples, he glanced at his updated schedule and froze. The additions jumped out like unwelcome intruders in his perfectly aligned grid, his brow furrowed, that familiar spark of irritation igniting. Who was she to tamper with his system? He stormed into her space, the door clicking shut behind him with a controlled snap. "What is this?" he demanded, pointing at the screen where her changes glowed innocently. Julie looked up calmly, her hands folding in her lap, unflinching under his glare. She explained it matter-of-factly, her voice steady, like someone who'd faced down worse bosses in dingier offices. Those short breaks weren't laziness. They were fuel, a way to recharge and come back stronger. He argued back at first, his words sharp and dismissive, insisting control meant no wasted seconds, that efficiency was about packing it all in. It was how he'd risen to the top, outpacing everyone who dared pause. But Julie held her ground, not with anger, but with quiet logic, pulled from real life, the kind where exhaustion led to mistakes, where a clear head won the day. Deep down, Warren felt a twinge, an unfamiliar doubt creeping in. His life was a non-stop sprint, but was it sustainable? Had he ever stopped to question if his iron grip was squeezing the life out of everything, including himself? Reluctantly, he let the changes stand, more out of curiosity than agreement, and plunged back into his day. The first buffer hit mid-afternoon, a forced halt that made him fidget at first, staring out the window at the city below, his mind racing ahead. But as the minutes ticked, something shifted. The tension in his shoulders eased. Ideas that had been tangled suddenly straightened out. By evening, wrapping up earlier than usual, he reviewed the day's output. Deals closed cleanly, decisions made with unusual precision. He sat back in his chair, the office lights dimming around him, and admitted to himself, in the quiet of his thoughts, that her chaos had brought a strange order. For the first time, his control didn't feel like the only answer. Julie, packing her bag nearby, caught his eye, a small victory in her steady gaze, hinting at the partnership simmering just beneath the surface. The conference room at Burke Enterprises carried the faint scent of fresh polish and brewing tension, its long mahogany table reflecting the afternoon light, like a mirror to the high-stakes world outside. Ewan Moss, the sharp-eyed investor with a reputation for sniffing out weaknesses in deals faster than a hound on a trail, arrived right on time, his handshake firm and his smile calculated. He'd built his fortune backing winners, and today he was here to size up Warren's latest venture, a complex tech merger that promised to reshape the market, but came wrapped in layers of jargon and projections that could baffle even the pros. Warren greeted him with his usual polished confidence, the two men settling into chairs that creaked softly under their weight, while Julie hovered at the periphery, notepad in hand, ready to fetch whatever was needed without drawing attention. At first, Ewan barely glanced her way, his bushy eyebrows arching just a touch when Warren introduced her as his new assistant. She felt that familiar sting, the quick dismissal, the assumption that she was just another face in the background, there to pour water or take notes. It reminded her of too many jobs where she'd been invisible, her ideas overlooked because she didn't come with a fancy degree or a designer's suit. But she kept her expression neutral, pouring glasses of chilled water that clinked against the crystal, the cool droplets beating on the sides like tiny reminders to stay composed. Inside, she listened intently as the conversation dove into the merger's intricacies, Warren's voice steady as he outlined algorithms and data flows that sounded like a foreign language to anyone not steeped in the tech trenches. Then came the snag, Warren hit a wall, explaining a particularly thorny concept: the integration of legacy systems with AI-driven analytics. His words flowed smoothly at first, but Ewan's face clouded, his fingers drumming on the table in that impatient rhythm that screamed skepticism. Warren paused, searching for a clearer angle, the room growing quieter except for the distant hum of the city traffic far below. He could feel the deal teetering, the kind of moment where fortunes hung on a single thread. Julie, standing by the projector, sensed the shift too. She'd been following along, her mind piecing together the puzzle from the sidelines, drawing on her own scrappy experiences, juggling mismatched systems in past gigs. Nothing as grand as this, but the principles felt universal. Without overthinking it, she stepped in gently, her voice cutting through the stall like a fresh breeze. She likened the integration to merging two old family recipes, one traditional, the other modern and flashy, where you had to blend them without losing the core flavor that made each special. Use too much force and it all turned to mush. Do it right, and you got something better than either alone. She kept it simple, pulling in everyday images of kitchens and trial-and-error cooking, the kind of analogies that grounded the abstract in something tangible. Ewan's drumming stopped. He leaned forward, his eyes lighting up as he nodded slowly, a gruff chuckle escaping him. "Now that makes sense," he muttered, the tension easing like air from a balloon. The room warmed a degree, the deal inching back on track as he peppered her with follow-ups, genuinely engaged. Warren watched it unfold, a quiet surprise rippling through him. This wasn't the assistant he'd hired on a whim. This was someone who saw the gaps he missed, who turned complexity into clarity with a touch of real-world wisdom he rarely encountered in his echo chamber of experts. For the first time, he didn't see her as a subordinate to test her control. She felt like an equal, a partner who complemented his strengths without dimming them. It unsettled him, this shift, stirring something deeper than professional respect, a spark of admiration that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. As the meeting wrapped, Ewan clapping Warren on the back with renewed enthusiasm, Julie gathered her notes quietly. But their eyes met across the table, a fleeting connection that hinted at walls starting to crack. The merger moved forward, but so did something else, unspoken and building, in the space between them. The storm rolled in like an uninvited guest, darkening the sky over the city with heavy clouds that unleashed a torrent of rain against the windows of Burke Tower. What started as a late afternoon drizzle had escalated into a full-blown downpour, the kind that turned streets into rivers and kept even the most dedicated workers glued to their desks. Julie and Warren had stayed behind, poring over final tweaks to a proposal that couldn't wait until morning. The office, usually buzzing with energy, now felt eerily quiet as the last employees trickled out, umbrellas in hand, leaving just the two of them amid the hum of fluorescent lights and the relentless patter outside. Then, with a flicker and a pop, the power cut out. The room plunged into dimness, the only illumination coming from the gray glow filtering through the rain-streaked glass and the faint emergency lights in the hall. Julie stood by the window, her arms crossed against the sudden chill that seeped in, watching lightning streak across the horizon like jagged veins. The air grew heavier, carrying the earthy scent of wet pavement rising from below, mixed with the faint, lingering aroma of coffee from earlier. She shivered slightly, not just from the cold, but from the unexpected vulnerability of the moment. No screens, no deadlines, just the storm holding them captive. Warren, who had been pacing with his phone in hand, trying futilely for a signal, finally set it down on the desk with a soft thud. He glanced her way, really looked at her for perhaps the first time without the filter of work. In this stripped-down light, she seemed different, less the bold assistant who'd upended his schedule, more a person with her own quiet depths. He moved closer, the carpet muffling his steps, and for once his voice lost its commanding edge when he spoke. It was a simple question born from the silence, something about what drove her, what she dreamed of beyond the daily grind. Julie hesitated at first, her breath fogging the glass a little as she turned toward him. but the storm's rhythm, steady and insistent, coaxed her to open up. She shared glimpses of her aspirations, not grand fantasies, but real ones, like starting a small culinary venture someday, blending flavors from her mismatched life experiences into something comforting and new. It was the kind of dream pieced together from late nights experimenting in a tiny kitchen, from recipes handed down and tweaked through trial and error. Her words came out measured, laced with that practical optimism she'd honed through setbacks, the ones that taught her resilience without bitterness. He listened, really listened, leaning against the desk with his arms folded, the shadows playing across his face softening those sharp lines. It was unfamiliar territory for him, conversations that weren't about leverage or strategy, but about the raw stuff of life. Something stirred inside, a quiet acknowledgement that her world, so different from his polished one, held a warmth he'd long ago walled off. When he noticed her shiver again, the goosebumps rising on her arms in the cooling room, he didn't think twice. He shrugged off his tailored vest, the fine wool still carrying the subtle warmth of his body, and a hint of his cologne, clean, woody notes that mingled with the rain's freshness. Gently he draped it over her shoulders, the fabric settling like a protective shield, his fingers brushing her arm just briefly in a gesture that felt surprisingly tender. She looked up, surprised but not pulling away, the weight of the vest a small comfort against the chill. In that moment, with the thunder rumbling like a distant conversation, the barriers between them thinned. It wasn't grand or dramatic, just a genuine spark of care in the midst of the storm, hinting at connections deeper than any deal or test. The rain continued to lash the windows, but inside, a subtle shift had begun, one that neither could ignore as they waited out the night. The grand ballroom of the upscale hotel shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the air filled with the soft clink of champagne glasses and the murmur of polished conversations. Burke Enterprises' annual gala was in full swing, a sea of tuxedos and elegant gowns swirling around tables laden with gourmet hors d'oeuvres. Tiny bites of caviar on crisp crackers, the salty tang mingling with the floral notes of expensive wines. Julie moved through the crowd with a newfound ease, her simple black dress hugging her figure in a way that felt empowering rather than out of place. Weeks of navigating Warren's world had built her confidence, turning those early stumbles into stepping stones, and tonight she carried herself like she belonged. Warren stood at the center of it all, his charisma drawing people in like moths to a flame, but there was a subtle change in him, a looseness in his shoulders, a genuine smile that reached his eyes more often. He'd glanced her way multiple times, a silent acknowledgement of their growing connection, that rainy night still echoing in the quiet looks they shared. As the evening progressed, Julie found herself in a small circle of guests, executives and partners who'd warmed to her quick wit during recent meetings. One of them, a silver-haired investor with a booming laugh, asked how she'd landed at Burke, curiosity lighting his face. She hesitated for just a beat, then dove in with a sparkle in her eye, recounting that chaotic morning when she'd mistaken Warren for her Uber driver. She painted the picture vividly, the spilled coffee staining her blouse, the desperate dash to the curb, hopping into the sleek car without a glance, barking orders like he was just another guy behind the wheel. And there I was, bossing him around the whole ride, telling him to skip the traffic lights if he could, she said lightly, her voice carrying a self-deprecating charm that drew chuckles from the group. She didn't mock him. Instead, she spun it as a funny twist of fate, highlighting her own flustered rush and his unexpected patience. The laughter rippled out, warm and genuine, heads turning as others nearby leaned in to catch the tale. One woman wiped a tear from her eye, saying it was the best story she'd heard all year, while a colleague slapped Warren on the back from across the room, calling him the world's most expensive chauffeur. Warren caught wind of it, his expression shifting to one of mock offense before breaking into a grin, raising his glass in a playful toast. For a moment, he looked almost boyish, the untouchable CEO humanized in the eyes of his peers, the story stripping away layers of intimidation, to reveal someone approachable, even endearing. Julie felt a rush of warmth as the group pulled her closer, toasting her boldness, the atmosphere buzzing with that easy camaraderie. It felt like a win, a real one, where she wasn't just the assistant anymore, but part of the inner circle, and Warren's approving gaze across the room sealed it. They exchanged a look that lingered, charged with unspoken affection, as if they'd crossed some invisible threshold into something solid, a partnership blooming right there amid the glitter and laughs. The night felt perfect, like everything was falling into place, the tensions of before melting away into this shared glow. Little did anyone know, this high was just a setup, a fleeting peak before the drop. Warren lingered at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of scotch in hand, the amber liquid catching the chandelier's sparkle as he watched the crowd from afar. The gala's energy pulsed around him, laughter and chatter blending into a comfortable hum that, for once, didn't grate on his nerves. He'd caught snippets of Julie's story earlier, her voice carrying that light, engaging tone that drew people in, but he hadn't thought much of it, until now. As he approached the group casually, intending to join with a quip of his own, the words hit him like a cold draft slipping through a cracked window. She was in full swing, animated as she described that fateful morning ride, her hands gesturing to mimic her frantic dash into his car. The listeners leaned in, their faces lit with amusement, erupting into fresh chuckles at the punchline, her bossing the CEO around like a cab driver. "Can you imagine? Treating Warren Burke like he's just the guy with the wheels?" one guest said, shaking his head in delight. The laughter swelled, warm and infectious, but to Warren it landed differently. Each peal felt like a jab, sharpening into something raw and exposing. This wasn't just a funny anecdote, it was him, laid bare as a fool, his carefully constructed image reduced to a punchline in his own domain. Deep inside, a storm brewed. That morning had been a private spark, a moment he'd come to cherish as the quirky start of whatever this was between them. But hearing it retold like this, twisted into entertainment for strangers, stirred up old ghosts, the fear of being diminished, of his power being mocked behind closed doors. He'd built his life on control, on being the one who commanded respect, not ridicule. Betrayal twisted in his gut. Had she shared it to shine, or to undercut him? His fingers tightened around the glass, the cool surface grounding him as his face hardened, the easy smile fading into a mask of stone. Without a word, he turned away, slipping through the crowd like a shadow retreating from light. The music swelled behind him, but it sounded distant now, muffled by the pounding in his ears. Julie, still basking in the group's warmth, didn't notice his departure, her laughter ringing out one last time as she accepted another toast. Warren made his way to the balcony doors, the cool night air hitting him as he stepped out, the city lights blurring below. In that solitude, the high of the evening shattered quietly, leaving him alone with the weight of his pride, cracked and crumbling in ways he hadn't anticipated. The gala carried on inside, oblivious, but for him everything had shifted, a silent collapse that echoed louder than any storm. Silence. The laughter fades, but Warren's cold fury remains. He saw betrayal where there was only innocent affection. Now his pride demands a price, but is it Julie who will pay, or is it time for him to learn a lesson he'll never forget? If you think it's time for this arrogant CEO to face the consequences of his actions, comment the word lesson below. Let's see what fate has in store. The morning after the gala dawned crisp and clear, but inside Burke Tower, a chill hung in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. Julie arrived early, as always, her steps echoing through the quiet lobby, carrying a fresh cup of that instant coffee she'd turned into their little inside joke. Last night's laughter still warmed her thoughts. The way the room had lit up, how Warren's eyes had sparkled from across the crowd, like they were finally on the same page. She hummed softly in the elevator, smoothing her skirt, ready for another day of their easy rhythm, the subtle glances and shared wins that had started to feel like something more. But when she pushed open the door to the executive suite, the change hit her like stepping into a freezer. Warren was already at his desk, buried in papers, his posture rigid as a statue. No good morning, no teasing remark about her reality brew, just a curt nod, his eyes barely lifting from the screen, cold and distant, as if she'd become invisible overnight. She set the coffee down with a soft clink, the steam rising ignored, and tried to break the ice the way she always did. A light comment about the gala's highlights, how fun it had been sharing that silly story, hoping for a chuckle, a spark to melt whatever this was. His response came clipped, professional to the point of sharpness. "Focus on the reports," he said without looking up, his voice flat, stripped of any warmth that had crept in over the weeks. It landed like a slap, leaving her standing there, confusion knotting in her chest. What had shifted? Last night everything felt right, like puzzle pieces clicking. Now it was as if a wall had slammed down, brick by unyielding brick, shutting her out. She swallowed the hurt, nodding quietly, and retreated to her desk, the office suddenly feeling too big, too empty. Throughout the day, the frost deepened. Meetings where he'd once sought her input now passed with him directing orders like she was just another employee, his tone efficient, but edged with ice. Julie tried again during a brief lull, approaching with a file in hand, her voice tentative but hopeful. Maybe ask about his weekend plans, something personal to bridge the gap. But he cut her off mid-sentence, a single-word reply that echoed hollow in the room, leaving her words hanging unfinished. The sting built slowly, a quiet ache that twisted deeper with each brush-off. Had she overstepped? Misread the signals? The uncertainty gnawed at her, mixing with a growing pain that made her throat tighten. She'd let her guard down, started to see him as more than the boss, and now this, cold shoulders and silence that spoke volumes. Warren, behind his facade, wrestled with his own turmoil. The hurt from the night before festered, his pride a bruised thing he couldn't shake, turning every interaction into a reminder of vulnerability he despised. He kept his distance deliberately, burying himself in work, but glimpses of her, the way her smile faltered, the confusion in her eyes, chipped at him. It wasn't fair, he knew deep down, but the wall felt safer, a shield against the fear of being diminished again. By afternoon, the office air thickened with unspoken wounds, both of them hurting in their separate silences, the warmth they'd built crumbling under the weight of misunderstanding. Julie stared out the window at the bustling city below, her heart heavy, wondering if this was the end of whatever fragile thing they'd started, while Warren gripped his pen tighter, the regret simmering just beneath his icy exterior. The weight of that frozen day stretched into the next, each hour chipping away at Julie's resolve like ice cracking underfoot. The office, once a place of sparks and subtle connections, now felt like a cage of silence, Warren's cold demeanor a constant shadow that followed her every move. She'd replayed the gala in her mind 100 times. The laughter, the shared glances, searching for the moment it all went wrong, but nothing clicked. All she knew was the hurt building inside, a quiet storm of confusion and rejection that made her chest ache with every clipped email or avoided eye contact. She wasn't one to beg for explanations. Life had taught her that some walls weren't worth scaling if they left you bruised and alone. By midday, she'd had enough. Sitting at her desk, the hum of the printer in the background like a mocking whisper, she pulled up a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, the cursor blinking expectantly, before she typed out the resignation letter, simple, professional, no frills or accusations, just a thank you for the opportunity, a notice of her intent to leave immediately, and a quiet wish for the company's success. Printing it felt final, the paper warm from the machine as she folded it neatly, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. This job had been a lifeline, but staying meant surrendering pieces of herself to this unexplained chill, and she valued her dignity more than any paycheck. She walked to Warren's office, the carpet muffling her steps, the door slightly ajar as if inviting the confrontation she didn't want. He was at his desk, staring at a report, his jaw set in that familiar line of focus. Or was it avoidance? She placed the letter on the polished wood with a soft thud, right in his line of sight, and paused, just long enough for him to register it. "This is my resignation," she said evenly, her voice carrying the quiet strength she'd always drawn on in tough spots. before turning and walking out. No drama, no tears, just a clean break, the door clicking shut behind her like the end of a chapter. The elevator ride down felt endless, the city blurring through the glass as relief mixed with a pang of loss. She'd let herself hope for more here, and now it was time to rebuild elsewhere. Back in the office, the silence descended like a heavy blanket, smothering the space in stillness. Warren stared at the folded paper, his fingers inching toward it as if it might burn. Unfolding it slowly, the words hit him square. Her neat signature at the bottom, the finality of her decision staring back. The room grew quieter. The distant traffic, a faint rumble. His own breathing loud in his ears. Regret crashed over him then, wave after unrelenting wave. What had he done? This woman who'd burst into his life with her unfiltered grit, who'd challenged his rigid world and made him feel alive for the first time in years. He'd pushed her away over a bruised ego, a misunderstanding he'd let fester like an open wound. The office, with its grand views and empty echoes, suddenly felt hollow, stripped of the one thing that had given it meaning. He crumpled the letter in his fist, the paper crinkling sharply, his mind reeling with the stupidity of it all. Pride had cost him dearly before, but this was a loss that cut deep, leaving him alone in the vast quiet, facing the void he'd created. The emptiness of the office clung to Warren like a second skin in the days that followed, each tick of the clock a reminder of the void Julie had left behind. He'd stared at that crumpled resignation letter until the words blurred, replaying his own foolishness, the way his pride had turned a harmless story into a betrayal, pushing away the one person who'd cracked through his armored life. Words, he realized, had failed him before. Apologies, tossed out in boardrooms or over polished dinners, always rang hollow, laced with the expectation of forgiveness on his terms. This time, it had to be different. Deeper. Something raw and unfiltered, stripped of his usual control. Late that evening, alone in his penthouse where the city lights twinkled mockingly through floor-to-ceiling windows, he sat at the antique desk that had once belonged to his grandfather, a relic from a simpler time, its wood scarred from years of honest use. He pulled out a sheet of heavy cream paper, the kind rarely touched in a world of emails and texts, and picked up a pen, its ink flowing smooth, but his hand hesitating at first. The words came slowly, poured from a place he'd long kept locked away. He admitted the truth, how her story at the gala had pierced him, stirring up old fears of being seen as less than the titan he'd built himself to be. He wrote of his weakness, the loneliness that hid behind his empire, the way he'd let ego blind him to the warmth she'd brought into his rigid days. And he confessed she was the light he'd been too afraid to reach for, the one who challenged him not with power plays, but with quiet strength and genuine heart, making him want to be better, not just bigger. The letter grew, page after page, his handwriting steadying as vulnerability spilled out. No grand gestures or promises of wealth, just honesty about his regrets, how he'd mishandled the spark between them, turning it cold out of sheer stupidity. He sealed it in an envelope, his fingers lingering on the flap, feeling the weight of this small act, a surrender of his arrogance, a step toward real change. It wasn't about winning her back with flair. It was about showing up, humble, proving he could let go of the reins. The next morning he skipped the Bentley, opting instead for a cab that blended into the city streets, directing it to her neighborhood, a modest corner of town with cracked sidewalks and corner delis, smelling of fresh bread and coffee. The buildings here were lived in, windows framed with curtains that spoke of real homes, not staged perfection. He walked the last block, his expensive shoes out of place on the uneven pavement, the envelope clutched in his hand like a fragile hope. Her apartment building loomed simple and unassuming, the buzzer panel worn from countless presses. He waited outside, heart pounding in a way boardroom battles never caused, until she emerged, perhaps on her way to job hunt or run errands, her face drawn but still carrying that resilient spark. Their eyes met across the stoop, surprise flickering in hers, a mix of wariness and unresolved hurt. Warren didn't launch into speeches or demands. He simply stepped forward, humble in his silence, and extended the envelope. No words to dress it up, just the quiet offering. His gaze steady but softened, stripped of the CEO armor. She took it hesitantly, the paper crinkling softly between them, and for a moment the bustling street faded, the honks and chatter distant as something unspoken passed in that exchange. He nodded once, a small gesture of respect, then turned and walked away, leaving the letter to speak for him. Back in the cab, the city rushing by, he felt a strange lightness, the first crack in his self-imposed isolation. Julie, standing there with the envelope in hand, felt the weight of it too, a potential bridge over the chasm he'd created. Whether she'd cross it was up to her, but for Warren, the act itself was the start of mending, a quiet proof that change wasn't just words, but actions born from the heart. Julie held the envelope in her hands long after Warren had walked away, the paper slightly creased from his grip, carrying a faint trace of that woody cologne she'd come to associate with him. Back in her small apartment, the afternoon light slanting through the blinds in golden strips, she sank onto the worn couch, the springs creaking softly under her weight. Her fingers trembled just a bit as she tore it open, unfolding the pages that revealed his handwriting, neat, but with a raw urgency, like words wrestled onto the page after a long fight. She read slowly, each line sinking in, his admissions of fear, the way pride had twisted a harmless moment into something poisonous, how he'd built walls so high he'd forgotten how to let anyone in. It wasn't flowery or manipulative. It was honest, vulnerable, the kind of truth that hit her in the quiet places where hurt still lingered. Tears blurred the ink for a moment, not from pity, but from seeing a man finally stripping away the armor, offering a glimpse of the heart beneath. She set the letter down, staring at the ceiling, feeling the shift inside, a decision forming, not out of weakness, but from recognizing genuine effort. Everyone deserved a second chance if they earned it, and this felt like the start of him trying. The next day, she made her way back to Burke Tower, the familiar lobby greeting her with its polished floors and hushed efficiency. No fanfare, just a quiet resolve as she rode the elevator up. Her reflection in the mirrored walls, showing a woman ready to test the waters again. The office buzzed with an undercurrent of chaos when she arrived, phones ringing off the hook, assistants huddled over screens, the air thick with tension. A media storm had erupted overnight, leaked emails suggesting a shady deal in one of the company's past mergers, headlines screaming scandal, stock prices dipping like a stone in water. Reporters camped outside, social media ablaze with accusations that painted Warren as the ruthless tycoon, the kind of story that could unravel years of work in hours. Warren stood in the conference room, surrounded by his crisis team, lawyers in sharp suits, PR experts scribbling notes, the room smelling of stale coffee and stress-sweated shirts. His face was drawn, shadows under his eyes from a sleepless night, but when Julie walked in unannounced, the room paused. He looked up, surprise flickering across his features, followed by a quiet relief that softened the edges. No grand reunion, just a nod from her, a silent agreement to step back into the fray. The team briefed her quickly. The leak was from an old rival, twisted facts meant to damage, but with kernels of truth that made denial tricky. Warren could have barked orders, fallen back on his old controlling ways, directing the response like a solo general. But he didn't. He turned to her, the room falling quiet, and asked simply, his voice steady but open, "What should we do?" It was the "we" that mattered, a small word carrying the weight of partnership. Julie didn't hesitate. She pulled up a chair, her mind already whirring from years of turning messes into opportunities in her own life. Scraping by, improvising fixes for broken things. Together, they dissected the crisis, her practical insights blending with his strategic mind. She suggested leaning into the human side. Not deny the past missteps, but own them. Spin a narrative of growth. Turn the weakness into a story of change. A company evolving, led by a man who'd learned from his flaws. Warren listened, really listened, building on her ideas, the team watching as they bounced thoughts back and forth, the energy shifting from panic to purpose. They drafted a statement, transparent, heartfelt, announcing reforms, and a personal apology from Warren, backed by actions like donating to affected communities. Julie's touch added warmth, real stories of employees' everyday impacts, to make it relatable, not corporate spin. As the press conference unfolded later that afternoon, streamed live with cameras flashing like summer lightning, their plan unfolded flawlessly. Warren spoke first, his tone humble, admitting faults without excuses, then handed the mic to Julie, who shared how the company was committing to better paths, her voice clear and grounded, drawing nods from the crowd. The tide turned almost visibly. Social media shifted from outrage to admiration, stocks stabilizing as the story morphed into one of redemption. A business humanized. By evening, as the office emptied, victory hung in the air like a fresh start. Warren and Julie stood by the window, the city lights twinkling below, a quiet understanding between them. This wasn't just saving a company, it was them, side by side, turning cracks into strengths, proving that real power came from facing storms together. The bond felt solid now, forged in crisis, a true alliance that promised more than survival, growth, respect, and the kind of love built to last. With the crisis averted and the office settling into a relieved hush, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks that filtered through the glass walls like a gentle promise. Warren suggested they step out to the rooftop terrace, a quiet space high above the city, where the wind carried the faint hum of traffic below, and the air smelled clean, laced with the distant scent of rain-washed streets. Julie agreed, her steps light beside his, the day's victory still buzzing in her veins, but something deeper stirring now, a pull toward resolution that went beyond work. Up there, away from the desks and ringing phones, the world felt smaller, more intimate. The terrace was simple. A few potted plants rustling in the breeze, metal railings cool to the touch, and a bench overlooking the sprawling lights, starting to flicker on like stars waking up. They stood side by side at first, shoulders almost brushing, the silence comfortable but charged, like the calm after a storm they'd weathered together. Warren turned to her, his usual commanding presence softened, the lines around his eyes speaking of lessons learned the hard way. He'd changed, not in flashy ways, but in the quiet ones. The way he listened now, the humility that had replaced his old armor. The man who'd once seen people as pieces on a board now looked at her like she was the center of his world. He took a breath, the words coming out steady but laced with a vulnerability that made her heart skip. It wasn't a grand speech, no rehearsed lines from a boardroom playbook. He spoke from the gut, admitting how she'd upended everything he thought he knew. About control, about success, about himself. "I don't want you working for me anymore," he said, his voice low against the wind, eyes locked on hers with an earnestness that cut straight through. "I want us working together, building something real, a life, not just a business." It was a promise of equality, of partnership, wrapped in the simple truth that she'd shown him how to be better, how to love without strings or power plays. No diamonds or dramatic gestures, just him, stripped down, offering his heart as an equal. committing to the kind of love that grew from respect and shared strength. Julie felt it land deep, a warmth spreading through her that chased away the last shadows of doubt. She'd seen his growth, not just in words, but in actions. The way he'd leaned on her during the chaos, trusted her instincts as much as his own. It wasn't about being rescued or tamed. It was about two people choosing each other, flaws and all, to face whatever came next. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, the touch solid and reassuring. Acceptance came naturally, a quiet yes in her smile, in the way she stepped closer, the city fading into the background as they stood there, connected in a moment that felt earned, mature, and full of possibility. The wind picked up, carrying their unspoken hopes into the evening, sealing a bond that promised not just romance, but a true team, ready for whatever life threw their way. 2 years slipped by like pages in a well-loved book, each one turning with the quiet rhythm of growth and shared dreams. Julie had taken that spark from her old aspirations and fanned it into a flame, launching her own culinary brand, a cozy line of home-style meals blending comfort food with clever twists she'd honed from years of making do. It started small, in a rented kitchen space with a handful of recipes, but word spread fast. Her dishes weren't just tasty. They told stories of resilience, of turning everyday ingredients into something special. Orders poured in, from local stores to online buzz, and soon her brand was a hit, featured in magazines as the go-to for busy folks craving real flavor without the fuss. She ran it all with that same steady hand, her office a warm hub of activity where employees felt like family, proving she was every bit the powerhouse she'd always been deep down. Warren, still at the helm of Burke Enterprises, had evolved too, not in flashy overhauls, but in the everyday ways that mattered. The once rigid CEO now led with a gentler touch, prioritizing balance and people over endless grind. Board meetings included breaks for real talk, and he championed initiatives that gave back, like funding community programs inspired by Julie's roots. He'd learned to let go, to value the quiet moments that built a life worth living. Their home, a blend of his sleek penthouse style and her cozy touches, soft rugs underfoot, shelves lined with spices and cookbooks, became a sanctuary where work took a back seat to what truly counted. On a lazy Sunday evening, the kitchen filled with the sizzle of onions hitting a hot pan, the air rich with garlic and herbs that danced like old friends. Julie stood at the counter, chopping vegetables with practiced ease, her apron dusted with flour from the dough she'd kneaded earlier. Warren was beside her, sleeves rolled up on his casual shirt, stirring a sauce with a wooden spoon, his movements relaxed, a far cry from the man who'd once commanded rooms with a glance. They moved in sync, like a well-rehearsed duet, her passing him a dash of salt, him tasting and nodding approval with a grin that crinkled his eyes. Laughter bubbled up as he fumbled a flip of the veggies, sending a few scattering across the stove. See? Even CEOs have off days, he teased himself, scooping them back with a chuckle that warmed the room more than the oven. Julie shook her head, smiling wide, her hand brushing his in a casual touch that spoke volumes. They talked easily about the week, her latest menu launch, his push for ethical sourcing at the company. Ideas flowing without hierarchy, just two equals, building on each other's strengths. As the meal came together, plates steaming with pasta swirled in homemade sauce, they sat at the island, clinking glasses of simple wine, the city lights twinkling outside like a backdrop to their contentment. In those moments, they were the ultimate power couple, not defined by wealth or titles, but by the unbreakable team they'd become. Trials had tested them, egos had clashed, but love had won out, rooted in respect and the kind of partnership that turned ordinary days into triumphs. As they leaned in, sharing a quiet kiss amid the lingering aromas, it was clear. This was happiness, earned and enduring, a story of two souls who found their way home in each other. Julian Warren's story has concluded, but the feelings it leaves behind remain. Thank you for listening. We believe that every story is a thread that connects us all. If you also believe in the power of second chances and a love that can overcome any prejudice, let us know by hitting the like button. Share this story with a friend you think would love it. And don't forget to subscribe to become part of our community of story lovers. See you next time.